The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not just any quiet, a profound stillness that seemed to penetrate every molecule of air around me. I stood at the edge of the desert at dawn, watching as the first golden rays of sunlight spilled across an empty landscape that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. There was something about this vastness, this apparent nothingness, that felt strangely alive with possibility. Perhaps that's when the question first entered my mind. What if emptiness isn't the absence of everything, but rather the foundation of all existence? We live in a world obsessed with accumulation. More success, more wealth, more knowledge, more connections, more things. But what if the greatest power lies not in what we add to our lives, but in what we remove? What if the void isn't something to be feared, but the gateway to everything we seek? This journey began with a simple realization. Everything I thought I knew about reality was built on assumptions I'd never questioned. The solid ground beneath my feet, the separation between myself and others, the linear flow of time, all these facts began to dissolve under scrutiny like mirages in the desert sun. As a journalist who'd spent decades investigating the nature of consciousness and reality, I'd interviewed hundreds of quantum physicists, neuroscientists, mystics, and philosophers. Their seemingly disparate viewpoints had finally coalesced into a stunning insight. Nothingness is the most misunderstood and powerful force in existence. When I shared this revelation with Dr. Eleanor Wright, a quantum physicist at the Institute for Advanced Studies, she nodded knowingly. The universe, she told me, leaning forward in her chair, is not what it appears to be. The solid matter that seems so substantial is mostly empty space. If you could remove all the empty space from the atoms in your body, you'd be smaller than a speck of dust, yet your mass would remain the same. This concept had boggled my mind. How could something that seems so solid be predominantly nothing? Yet this paradox lies at the heart of quantum physics. The deeper scientists probe into the nature of matter, the more elusive it becomes, until all that remains are probabilities and potentials emerging from a field of seemingly infinite possibilities. Since the early days of quantum mechanics, Dr. Wright continued, we've known that particles can appear spontaneously from the quantum vacuum, what we once thought was nothing. This nothing is actually a teeming sea of potential energy. It's not empty at all. It's full of possibility. From the moment we're born, we're conditioned to operate within a certain framework of reality. We learn that objects are solid and separate from ourselves. We learn that time moves forward in a linear fashion. We learn that cause precedes effect. These lessons shape our perception so fundamentally that we rarely question them. Yet modern science has systematically dismantled these assumptions, revealing a reality far stranger and more magical than we ever imagined. Consider the simplest object, a chair. It appears solid, separate from you, existing independently of your observation. But at the quantum level, it's a vibrating collection of atoms, which themselves are patterns of energy with vast spaces between particles. Those particles aren't even things in the conventional sense. They're probability waves that only take definite positions when measured or observed. In essence, that seemingly solid chair is 99.999% empty space. This isn't just theoretical physics. It's the fundamental nature of everything we experience. As Dr. Michio Hasegawa, a theoretical physicist I interviewed at Tokyo University, explained, reality is not made of things. Reality is made of relationships, patterns, and probabilities, emerging from a field of infinite potential that we might call nothing. What's most fascinating about this understanding is how closely it aligns with ancient wisdom traditions. Long before quantum physics, mystical traditions from around the world spoke of the illusory nature of physical reality. The Vedic concept of Maya describes the material world as an illusion. Buddhist teachings on emptiness, shunyata, suggest that all phenomena lack inherent existence. Taoist philosophy speaks of the void as the source of all being. Sarah Jameson, a professor of comparative religion at Oxford University, explained it to me this way. These traditions weren't making speculative claims. They were reporting direct observations about the nature of consciousness and reality. Through practices like meditation, they discovered that when you quiet the mind, the boundaries between self and other, between something and nothing, begin to dissolve. I've experienced this dissolution myself during extended meditation retreats. After days of sitting in silence, watching my breath, the solid world began to shimmer and become transparent. The distinction between myself and everything around me grew blurry. For brief moments, I occupied a space of pure awareness, neither something nor nothing, but the ground from which both emerge. This experience isn't just subjective. Research on advanced meditators shows measurable changes in brain activity and perception. Dr. Rachel Davidson, a neuroscientist at the University of California, has spent decades studying these states. What we're finding, she told me, is that when people access these states of consciousness, where the separate self seems to dissolve, they're not experiencing an illusion. They're actually perceiving reality more accurately, bypassing the filters their brains normally impose. The implications of this understanding are profound. If reality is fundamentally empty of inherent existence, if it's more like a projection or simulation than a collection of solid objects, then our role in creating what we experience takes on new significance. Consider the famous double-slit experiment in quantum physics. When scientists observe particles passing through slits, the mere act of observation changes how the particles behave, from waves of probability to definite particles with specific locations. This observer effect suggests that consciousness itself plays a role in how reality manifests. We can no longer consider ourselves passive observers of an objective world, explained Dr. Anton Mueller, quantum physicist and author of The Conscious Universe. We are participatory observers. The act of observation is an act of creation. This understanding resolves the seeming paradox between ancient wisdom and modern science. The mystics weren't deluded. They had discovered through direct experience what quantum physicists would later verify through experiments. Reality emerges from a field of infinite potential, and our consciousness helps shape what manifests from this field. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. If nothing is the source of everything, then the space between things, the gaps, the intervals, the silences, takes on profound significance. It's in this emptiness that all possibilities exist. I discussed this concept with Maria Vasquez, a concert pianist, who described how music depends as much on the silences between notes as the notes themselves. Without the pauses, there is no rhythm, no melody, she explained. The spaces between notes create the structure that allows music to exist. In the same way, the pauses between our thoughts create the space for new insights to arise. This principle applies to all aspects of life. Consider innovation and creativity. Most breakthrough ideas don't come from adding more information, but from creating mental space that allows for new connections. Steve Jobs, known for his minimalist aesthetic, understood this intuitively. He once said, "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. By removing the unnecessary, we create space for the essential to emerge." The same is true in our personal lives. Many of us feel overwhelmed by information, commitments, possessions, and constant stimulation. We try to solve our problems by adding more knowledge, more tools, more techniques. But what if the solution isn't addition but subtraction? What if power comes from creating space? Jason Miller, a former hedge fund manager who now teaches mindfulness to executives, described his personal transformation. "I'd built my life around accumulation, wealth, status, achievements. I was constantly stressed, never satisfied. It wasn't until I lost everything in the financial crisis that I discovered the power of emptiness. In that space of having nothing to lose, I found a freedom and creativity I never knew existed." This brings us to a radical idea. Manifestation, the process of bringing things into being, flows from emptiness rather than effort. Most approaches to achieving goals focus on doing more, pushing harder, adding more action steps. But what if the most effective approach is the opposite? What if creating space through letting go is the true secret to manifesting what we desire? Wei Chen, a Taoist master I studied with in the mountains of China, explained this using the concept of Wu Wei, or non-doing. "The universe already contains everything you seek," he told me as we sat beside a mountain stream. "Your effort creates resistance. Let go of striving, and what you need will come to you naturally, like water flowing downhill." I was skeptical of this approach until I tried it myself. After years of pushing and striving in my career, I experimented with letting go, creating space in my schedule, releasing attachment to outcomes, trusting the process. The results were counterintuitive and remarkable. Opportunities appeared effortlessly. Creative solutions arose spontaneously. Relationships deepened. My work became more impactful with less effort. Dr. Elena Kuznetsova, a cognitive neuroscientist specializing in creativity research, explained why this works. The brain's default mode network, active when we're not focused on specific tasks, plays a crucial role in insight and innovation. When we create mental space through meditation, daydreaming, or simply being present without agenda, we access this network more fully. This understanding transforms how we approach problems and goals. Instead of asking, "What do I need to add to solve this?" we might ask, "What can I remove to create space for the solution to emerge?" The power of nothing extends beyond personal transformation to how we understand language and meaning. Words themselves are empty vessels, symbols that have no inherent meaning until we assign it. Yet these empty symbols shape our perception of reality in profound ways. Dr. Robert Anderson, a linguistic anthropologist at Stanford University, has studied how different languages shape the way people think and perceive the world. Language isn't just a tool for describing reality, he explained. It actively constructs the reality we experience by directing our attention in specific ways. For example, some indigenous languages don't have separate words for blue and green, resulting in speakers of those languages perceiving these colors differently than English speakers. Some languages don't use terms like left and right, but instead use absolute directions like north and south, resulting in speakers who have superior spatial orientation. The gaps between words, what language doesn't capture, may be as important as what it does, Dr. Anderson continued. Each language offers a particular window onto reality, highlighting certain aspects while rendering others invisible. This insight reveals another dimension of nothingness. The spaces between concepts, the areas our language doesn't illuminate, may contain untapped potential. By becoming aware of the limitations of our linguistic frameworks, we can access modes of knowing that transcend words. Poets have long understood this power. As T.S. Eliot wrote in Burnt Norton, "Words strain, crack, and sometimes break. Under the burden, under the tension, slip, slide, perish, decay with imprecision, will not stay in place, will not stay still." The poet's art is to use words to point beyond words, to evoke the ineffable spaces between concepts. When we become aware of language as a construct, we gain freedom from its limitations. We can use words more consciously, recognizing them as tools rather than truths. We might even discover that our most profound realizations occur in the silence beyond language, in the gap between thoughts. Meditation teacher Thich Nhat Hanh described this experience. The most precious gift we can offer others is our presence. When mindfulness embraces those we love, they will bloom like flowers. This presence isn't something we add to ourselves. It's what remains when we remove distraction, judgment, and unnecessary mental activity. It's the space we create by emptying ourselves of preconceptions. This brings us to perhaps the most profound paradox. Nothing and everything are ultimately the same. The boundary between emptiness and form is illusory. Each contains and gives rise to the other in an eternal dance of becoming. Physicist David Bohm described this relationship using the concept of the implicate and explicate order. The explicate order is the world of distinct, separate objects that we perceive with our senses. The implicate order is the deeper reality in which everything is connected in a seamless whole. Just as a hologram contains the whole image in each of its parts, Bohm suggested that each part of the universe contains information about the whole. The most advanced contemplative traditions point to this same understanding. The Heart Sutra, a core Buddhist text, famously declares, "Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form." This isn't meant to be understood intellectually, but experienced directly. When consciousness rests in its own nature, the distinction between something and nothing dissolves. I spoke with Dr. John Matthews, a theoretical physicist who is also a longtime meditator, about this convergence between science and contemplative wisdom. We're reaching a point where the most advanced scientific understandings and the deepest spiritual insights are pointing to the same reality, he told me. Both tell us that separateness is an illusion, that at the fundamental level, reality is a unified field of potential from which all appearances arise. This understanding isn't just philosophical. It has practical implications for how we live and navigate challenges. When we recognize that the solid world is more fluid and responsive to consciousness than we've been taught, we approach problems differently. Instead of struggling against seemingly fixed conditions, we look for the spaces between, the gaps in the matrix where transformation is possible. Environmental scientist and systems thinker Dr. Catherine Williams applies this understanding to complex global challenges. When we approach problems like climate change or social inequality as fixed, solid entities, we feel overwhelmed and powerless. But when we recognize these as dynamic patterns emerging from interconnected systems, we can identify leverage points, small interventions that create space for new patterns to emerge. This approach, finding the spaces between, the leverage points, the gaps in seemingly solid systems, has proven remarkably effective across disciplines, from ecology to economics, from psychology to politics. On an individual level, accessing this power begins with creating space in our own consciousness. Most of us live with minds full of incessant thinking, planning, remembering, and worrying. This mental activity creates a sense of solidity and separation that masks our connection to the field of infinite potential. Meditation traditions offer various techniques for creating inner space, for touching the nothing at the heart of everything. Some use focused attention on a single object like the breath. Others use open awareness, observing whatever arises without attachment. Still others use inquiry, questioning the nature of the self and reality. Dr. Davidson, the neuroscientist studying advanced meditators, has documented how these practices literally change the brain. We see decreased activity in the default mode network associated with self-referential thinking. We see increased connectivity between regions associated with attention and emotional regulation. In essence, these practices create space in the brain, gaps in the usual patterns of activity that allow new neural connections to form. This neuroplasticity mirrors the quantum understanding of reality as fluid and responsive rather than fixed. Just as particles emerge from the quantum vacuum, new neural pathways emerge from the space created through meditation and mindfulness. But creating external space is equally important. Our physical environments profoundly affect our consciousness. Decluttering expert Marie Kondo's philosophy that items should spark joy resonates because it's not really about organizing possessions. It's about creating space, both physical and psychological. By removing what doesn't serve us, we create room for what does. The same principle applies to our schedules and commitments. In a culture that equates busyness with importance, creating empty time feels counterintuitive. Yet without this spaciousness, creativity and inspiration cannot flourish. As physician and author Gabor Mate observed, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. And meaningful connection requires space, unstructured time to be present with ourselves and others. Perhaps the most challenging but transformative application of this principle is in our relationships. Most relationship difficulties stem from projection, seeing others not as they are but as reflections of our own fears, desires, and unresolved issues. By creating space between our perceptions and reactions, we create room for authentic connection. Relationship therapist Esther Perel describes this as erotic space, not just in the sexual sense, but in the sense of aliveness and possibility. The space between two people is erotic when it allows for mystery, autonomy, and discovery. When we give others space to be themselves rather than projections of our needs, true intimacy becomes possible. This brings us back to the paradox. By embracing nothing, space, emptiness, the unknown, we gain access to everything. By letting go, we receive. By surrendering control, we gain influence. By accepting uncertainty, we find security. These paradoxes aren't meant to be resolved intellectually, but experienced directly. As I've integrated these understandings into my own life, I've noticed subtle but profound shifts. Problems that once seemed intractable have dissolved not through struggle, but through creating space around them. Creative insights arrive not through effort, but through receptivity. Relationships have deepened not through management, but through presence. Ancient wisdom and cutting-edge science agree. The most powerful force in existence isn't something, but nothing. The void isn't empty, it's pregnant with infinite possibility. The space between particles, between thoughts, between words, between people, this is where new realities are born. So how do we access this power? It begins with recognition, seeing through the illusion of solidity and separation. It continues with practice, creating space through meditation, simplification, letting go. And it culminates in direct experience, moments of clarity when we perceive reality as it is, not as our conditioned minds project it to be. Consider these practical approaches. Meditation or mindfulness practice creates space between thoughts, allowing us to witness the mind rather than being caught in its projections. Even a few minutes daily of sitting in silence, focusing on the breath, can begin to create this inner spaciousness. Simplifying our physical environment removes distractions and creates clarity. Each object we own carries an energetic weight, a demand for attention and maintenance. By keeping only what serves a purpose or brings joy, we create space for what matters most. Digital detox, periodic breaks from screens and information, creates mental space. The constant influx of information keeps us in a reactive state, responding to whatever appears before us. Scheduled time away from devices allows deeper patterns and insights to emerge. Practicing conscious language means becoming aware of how words shape perception and using them more intentionally. Notice when you use absolutes like always or never, when you speak in terms of lack or limitation, or when you use language that creates separation rather than connection. Embracing uncertainty means recognizing that the unknown is not something to fear, but to welcome. Our discomfort with uncertainty leads us to cling to rigid beliefs and premature conclusions. By learning to rest in not knowing, we create space for new understanding to arise. Using intention rather than force directs energy without creating resistance. Instead of pushing against reality, we align with the underlying patterns and flows of life. This doesn't mean passive acceptance, but rather strategic action that works with rather than against the natural movement of systems. Cultivating beginner's mind, approaching experiences with openness rather than preconception, creates space for discovery. Experts often fail to see innovative solutions because their knowledge creates fixed patterns of thinking. By temporarily setting aside what we think we know, we access fresh perspectives. These practices aren't about achieving some ideal state or accumulating spiritual experiences. They're about recognizing what's already true, that beneath the appearance of separate, solid forms is a unified field of conscious potential. Our true nature isn't something to be achieved, but revealed when we clear away the obscurations of conditioned perception. As physicist Max Planck, one of the founders of quantum theory, observed, science cannot solve the ultimate mystery of nature, and that is because, in the last analysis, we ourselves are part of nature and therefore part of the mystery that we are trying to solve. The observer cannot be separated from the observed. The one who seeks to understand reality is made of the same substance as what is being understood. This circular relationship between consciousness and reality points to what may be the ultimate revelation. We are both creators and creations, both the source and the manifestation, both nothing and everything. The power we seek doesn't lie in some external force or technique, but in recognizing our true nature as the aware space in which all experience arises. Spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle describes this recognition. You are not in the universe. You are the universe, an intrinsic part of it. Ultimately, you are not a person, but a focal point where the universe is becoming conscious of itself. What an amazing miracle. This miracle is available to everyone, not just mystics and scientists. Moments of profound presence, watching a sunset, being moved by music, holding a newborn, standing at the ocean's edge, can temporarily dissolve our sense of separation and give us a glimpse of this deeper reality. In these moments, we intuitively recognize what quantum physics and contemplative traditions tell us. The boundaries that seem to separate us from each other and from the universe are constructs of perception, not ultimate reality. As we integrate this understanding, a new way of being emerges, one characterized not by struggle and scarcity, but by flow and abundance. We begin to see opportunities where we once saw obstacles, connection where we once saw separation, and infinite potential where we once saw limitation. The poet Rumi captured this shift in perception. You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop. When we recognize ourselves as both the drop and the ocean, both form and emptiness, both something and nothing, we access a power beyond conventional understanding. This power doesn't manifest as control over external circumstances, but as freedom from being controlled by them. It doesn't appear as the ability to accumulate more, but as the recognition that we already have everything we need. It doesn't show up as immunity from life's challenges, but as the capacity to meet them with presence and creativity. In practical terms, this understanding transforms how we approach every aspect of life. In work, we shift from chasing external success to creating from internal fulfillment, producing results that benefit the whole rather than just ourselves. In relationships, we move from seeking to get our needs met to experiencing the joy of genuine connection and contribution. In health, we transition from battling against disease to creating conditions for well-being to flourish naturally. In creativity, we evolve from forced effort to receptive allowing, becoming channels for innovation rather than its source. In spirituality, we progress from seeking experiences to recognizing the awareness that already witnesses all experience. This transformation isn't instantaneous or linear. It unfolds as a spiral, with periods of clarity alternating with times when we fall back into old patterns of perception. But each return to spacious awareness makes the next one easier, gradually rewiring our default mode of being. The journey of awakening to the power of nothing isn't about escaping reality, but experiencing it more fully. It's not about transcending humanity, but embodying it more completely. It's not about reaching some perfect state, but embracing the perfect wholeness that already exists. As I stood in that desert at dawn, watching light transform the empty landscape, I realized that nothingness isn't the absence of everything. It's the presence of infinite possibility. The apparent void isn't empty, it's pregnant with potential, waiting to be recognized and expressed through conscious intention. This is the hidden code of reality that mystics, artists, and scientists have pointed to throughout history. Everything emerges from nothing, and by understanding the nature of nothing, we gain access to everything. The power we seek isn't found in accumulating more, but in creating space for what wants to emerge through us. In the words of physicist Niels Bohr, "If quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet." Perhaps the same could be said about the nature of reality itself. When we truly understand that solidity is an illusion, that separation is a construct of perception, and that nothing is the source of everything, our entire relationship with existence transforms. We become not just observers of reality, but conscious participants in its ongoing creation. We recognize ourselves as both the artwork and the artist, both the wave and the ocean, both the manifest and the unmanifested. In this recognition lies freedom. The freedom to create consciously rather than react unconsciously, to shape our experience through intention rather than be shaped by circumstance. As the sun rose higher in the desert sky, illuminating the seemingly empty landscape, I felt this freedom not as an intellectual concept, but as a lived reality. The boundary between myself and everything around me grew permeable. I experienced myself not as a separate entity observing the world, but as the awareness in which the world appears. In that moment, nothing and everything were revealed as two aspects of the same reality, and in that recognition was a power beyond words. This is the invitation extended to each of us, to look beyond appearances, to question our most fundamental assumptions about reality, and to discover the infinite potential that lies in the space between things, in the power of nothing.